My daughter and her husband invited me to spend the holidays with them at the beach house I'd given them as a wedding gift. When I arrived, a neighbor I'd never met came running across the yard waving her arms, her face tight with something that looked a lot like panic. She grabbed my arm and said, "Sir, please, don't go in there yet. You need to hear this first. I'm Franklin Holt. I'm 63 years old, and I thought I understood silence. I thought I understood what it meant to work quietly, to build something slowly, to never need anyone to know what you had. My late wife Carolyn used to say that the loudest thing in any room is what people assume about you. She was right about that. She was right about most things. My daughter Renata and her husband Drew had been calling me every other week for the past 2 months. Dad, you work too hard. Dad, you need to get out of that empty house. Dad, come down to Hilton Head for Christmas. We'll take care of you. At 63, with Carolyn gone 14 months now, I'll admit those calls felt like something. They felt like being wanted. I should have stopped there and asked myself why, after years of 2-hour phone calls becoming 20-minute ones, they suddenly couldn't wait to see me. I drove down from Charlotte on a Thursday morning. 8 hours. I stopped once for coffee and once because my back needed to stretch. The drive along the Carolina coast always settles something in me. The flat green marshes, the long bridges over gray water. By the time I turned onto the road that ran alongside the dunes, I was almost peaceful. Almost. The beach house sits on a quiet street a block off the water. White siding, blue shutters, a wide porch that faces the inlet. Carolyn and I bought it in 2003 for $120,000, worth considerably more now. We gave it to Renata and Drew when they married 8 years ago, told them to make it a home. It was a wedding gift, yes, but it was also something else. It was a foundation, a place to stand on. I pulled into the shell gravel driveway and sat in the car for a moment. The porch light was off. Both cars were gone. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I told Renata what time I was arriving. She'd said, "Great, we'll be here." I got out and stretched. The air smelled like salt and low tide. I walked up to the front door and knocked. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. I stood there, on the porch I'd built with my own hands one summer, looking at the dead begonias in the window boxes, the mail slot jammed with envelopes, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not panic. Not yet. Just a cold, quiet wrongness that I recognize from decades in business. The wrongness of something that doesn't add up. That's when I heard the screen door across the street. "Sir!" A woman's voice, urgent. "Sir, wait!" I turned. She was crossing the road at something close to a jog, maybe 50, 60 years old, wearing gardening gloves and an expression that told me she'd been thinking about whether to do this for a while. She stopped a few feet from me, looked up and down the empty street, and then looked directly at me. "Are you Renata's father, Franklin?" I said I was. She pulled off one of her gloves and held out her hand. "Josephine Marsh. I live right there." She nodded toward the small blue cottage. "I've been watching this house for a while now. Kept hoping I wouldn't need to do this." She glanced at the dark front windows. "But here you are, and I can't just stay quiet. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, hit that like button. Because this story is for you." Josephine Marsh did not seem like a woman who talked to strangers without reason. She had the careful, measured manner of someone who'd spent years watching and saying nothing, and had finally decided the cost of silence was too high. She told me she'd lived across that street for 11 years. She knew Carolyn. Had brought a casserole to the house the week after the funeral. "Your daughter called the real estate agent 3 weeks ago," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were apologetic. Not to rent it. Not to ask questions. To list it. I looked at her. I didn't say anything. I only know because my sister works at the agency. She called me when she saw the address. Josephine folded her glove in her hands. "They brought someone through last week for a walkthrough. A buyer. Your daughter told the agent the property was being sold to settle an estate." She paused. "She said you'd given her power of attorney before you went into assisted living." I am not in assisted living. I live in a 4,000 square foot house in Charlotte that I designed and built myself. I drive, I cook. I ran 6 miles last Tuesday, but standing on that porch with the November wind off the inlet, none of that felt like anything I could say out loud. "There's more," Josephine said. She said it the way people say it when they wish there wasn't. She told me about the party. 2 weekends ago, about 30 people spilling off the back deck, music until past midnight. She hadn't minded the noise. What she'd minded was what she overheard when two of their friends were standing near the street, thinking no one was around. They were laughing about something Drew had said at dinner, that the old man didn't have long. That the house was basically already theirs, that once it's sold, they could finally get out from under everything. Everything, I asked. Josephine looked at me with something like grief. They owe a lot of money, Mr. Holt. I don't know exactly how much, but I've seen the cars come by. Men I don't recognize sitting out front, sometimes for an hour. And last month, Drew had a conversation in the driveway, 2 in the afternoon, where he was on the phone saying, please, just give me until the new year, it'll be done by then. I thanked her. She started to say something else, stopped, and then said it anyway. Your wife used to bring me tomatoes from her garden, every August. She was a lovely woman. She put her glove back on. I think she would have wanted you to know. I sat in my car for a long time after Josephine went back inside. Carolyn. Of course, Carolyn would have known about this years ago. She had a gift for seeing the thing behind a thing. When Renata first brought Drew home, Carolyn smiled and shook his hand and was perfectly warm all through dinner. But later, washing dishes, she said to me, he looks at Renata the way some men look at a good deal. I'd told her she was being uncharitable. I do that. I see the version of people I want to see. Drew had a job in commercial real estate. Renata was a graphic designer, freelance. They lived from the outside, the life of a young couple finding their footing. Nice enough clothes. Decent car. They'd mentioned money being tight once or twice, but who hasn't? I never dug deeper. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself they were adults. I drove to the Holiday Inn Express on the main road, checked in, and called my attorney. His name is Ray Statham. We've worked together for 22 years. He picked up on the second ring, which is how I knew he'd seen my name and decided whatever he was doing could wait. I told him what Josephine had told me. I told him about the power of attorney that didn't exist, the estate being settled, the walkthrough with a buyer. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, stay where you are. Don't go to the house. Let me make some calls. I ordered room service. I ate half of it. I sat by the window and watched the cars go in and out of the gas station across the road and thought about my daughter at 7 years old. The way she used to fall asleep in the car on long trips, her cheek pressed against the window, completely trusting that wherever we were going, it would be fine. I thought about carrying her inside, the dead weight of a sleeping child, the particular feeling of being entirely necessary to someone. Ray called back at 9:45. Franklin. His voice had that quality it gets when something is both bad and manageable. There is an active listing on the property, listed at $680,000. A power of attorney document was submitted to the listing agent, notarized with your signature. The document states that you are in declining health and have authorized Renata Holt Caraway to act on your behalf in all real estate matters. I said that was not a document I had ever signed. I know, Ray said, because you'd have called me to draft it, and because the notary stamp is from a mobile notary service that dissolved last year. Whoever did this was sloppy, Franklin. They were in a hurry. A forged signature. A dead notary service. My daughter's name at the bottom. What do I do? I asked. Ray was quiet just long enough. You let me make one more call, and tomorrow morning you go to that house and you be exactly what they think you are. I knew what he meant. I'd built a company from nothing. I knew how to be underestimated on purpose. Renata called me at 7 the next morning. Her voice was warm and full of apology. Traffic had been terrible. They'd had to run an errand. She was so sorry I'd arrived to an empty house. They were home now. Please come by. I told her I'd had a long drive. I was a little tired. I'd see her for breakfast. She said, of course. Of course, take your time. There was no rush at all. There was no rush because they thought they had me. I put on my oldest jacket. I drove over slowly. I sat in the driveway for a moment before going in. Renata met me at the door. She was dressed like she was expecting company she needed to impress, which was odd, since it was just her father. Drew was in the kitchen, making a show of scrambling eggs. He shook my hand too firmly and said it was great to see me, called me Frank, which he knows I don't like, and pulled out a chair for me at the kitchen table with the practiced warmth of someone who learned hospitality from a seminar. The kitchen was the same as I remembered it. Same tile we'd picked out with Carolyn. Same light fixture I'd installed myself one Sunday afternoon while Renata handed me tools and talked about her plans for after college. But the pot rack was gone. The cast iron skillet Carolyn had left them was gone. In its place, a matching set of something chrome and expensive that still had the stickers on the handles. "You look tired, Dad," Renata said, pouring me coffee. "Are you sleeping okay?" I told her I slept fine. I asked about her work. She gave me an answer that lasted about 30 seconds and moved on. Drew ate standing at the counter. He kept checking his phone. After breakfast, Renata sat down across from me at the table with the expression of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say. Drew pulled a chair from the corner and sat beside her. They'd done this together. I could see the seams. "Dad," she said, "we've been wanting to talk to you about something." I set down my coffee cup. I put on the face of a man who was about to hear something difficult. It wasn't entirely acting. She talked about the economy, about how hard it was to keep up with property taxes and maintenance costs on a place this size, about how they'd been struggling quietly for a while, not wanting to worry me, about how the beach house market was strong right now, really strong, and that a financial advisor had suggested they consider their options while the opportunity was there. "Options?" I said. Drew leaned forward. He had the look of a man who has spent a lot of time calculating how to seem sincere. "We were thinking," he said, "that if you were willing to sell the property, it could benefit everyone. We'd split the proceeds. You'd have a cushion for, down the line." Down the line. "I'm 63, I said. My voice was mild. "What exactly is down the line?" Renata reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of, Dad. That's all." I looked at my daughter's hand on mine. I thought about every school play I'd sat through, every hospital waiting room, every early morning drive to a swim meet. I thought about what it costs to love someone so completely that you accept the version of them you hope they are, even when the evidence keeps mounting. "How much?" I asked. They exchanged a look. Drew said, "Well, the listing price would be around $680, after commissions and—" "No," I said. "How much do you owe?" The silence in that kitchen was a particular kind. The kind that forms when the story you've been telling gets interrupted by the truth. Renata looked at the table. Drew's jaw tightened. Then, because he had no other play left, he let some of the performance ball away. $140,000, he said. "Give or take." I asked him to whom. He said it was complicated. Business loans, a personal line of credit, a few things that had gotten away from them. He did not say private lender. He did not say the word that covered whoever those men were, sitting in their car out front in the middle of the afternoon. I nodded slowly. I held my coffee cup in both hands. I let my shoulders drop just slightly, let my eyes go a little vague the way they do when someone is overwhelmed and running at a fight. I have spent decades across the table from people who needed to believe they were winning. I know how to give them that feeling. "I need to think about it," I said. "I'm not going to make a decision today." Renata softened immediately. Drew sat back. They thought the wall was cracking. "Of course," Renata said. "Take all the time you need." I drove back to the Holiday Inn and called Ray. Ray had spent the morning on the phone with the Beaufort County Register of Deeds, the listing agent's broker, and a colleague who specialized in elder financial abuse law in South Carolina. What he told me in the next 12 minutes was precise, cold, and exactly what I needed to hear. The listing was active. The forged power of attorney had been submitted 10 days ago. There was a buyer under contract, a cash offer, closing scheduled for December 22nd. They had not told me. They had not planned to. The intent was to complete the sale, pay off their debt, and present me with a check for whatever remained, framed as them doing me a favor, settling my affairs while my health declined. Except my health was not declining. And the Hilton Head property was not in Renata's name. It was owned by the Franklin and Carolyn Holt Revocable Living Trust, established in 2009, with me as the sole trustee. Renata was listed as a beneficiary. She had the right to use the property during my lifetime. She had the right to inherit it. She did not have the right to inherit it. She did not have the right to sell it. No power of attorney, real or forged, could transfer that authority without a court order. Ray said, "They are actively committing fraud, Franklin. Forgery of a legal document. Fraudulent real estate transaction. In South Carolina, that's a felony." I asked him how he wanted to handle it. He said, "I have an idea, but you're going to have to trust me, and you're going to have to keep playing the tired old man for one more day." That night, Renata called again. She asked how I was feeling. She asked who I was feeling. She asked if I'd thought more about what they'd discussed. Her voice had exactly the warmth she'd always had as a child, and I understood for the first time what it means to grieve someone who is still alive. I told her I'd thought about it. I told her I was scared. I said the word scared in the soft, helpless way that I knew was what she was waiting to hear. I said I thought maybe they were right, that I couldn't manage all of this alone, that maybe it was time to simplify. I told her I wanted to come by in the morning and sign whatever needed signing. There was a pause on her end. Then, "Oh, Dad, I'm so glad. I think this is really the right decision." I set the phone down on the nightstand and sat in the dark for a while. Ray picked me up at 8:30 the next morning in a rental car. We drove to a conference room at the law firm of a colleague of his downtown, a two-story building on Bay Street with a view of the harbor. The room had a long, oval table, a credenza, and a stack of files that Ray had assembled overnight. I sat at the head of it. I looked out at the water. At 9, Renata and Drew arrived. Renata was dressed carefully, professional, but not overdone. Drew had on a blazer. They thought they were walking into a closing. They saw Ray in the files and Drew's step slowed for just a half a second. Renata smiled. She introduced herself to Ray like she was meeting a banker, cordial and confident. She sat down. Drew sat beside her. "Where are the papers?" Drew asked. He was trying to keep the impatience out of his voice. Ray opened the top folder. "We'll get to that," he said, "but first I need to share some information that's come to my attention." What followed was 20 minutes that I suspect Drew and Renata will be thinking about for a very long time. Ray laid out the trust documents. He explained, in plain language, what the Franklin and Carolyn Holt Revocable Living Trust meant, who held authority, and what could and could not be done with assets held within it. He placed the forged power of attorney on the table between them, the notary stamps circled in red pen, and explained that the notary service listed had not been active in 14 months. He explained what fraudulent conveyance meant under South Carolina law. He explained what elder financial abuse meant, and what the penalties were, and that a complaint had already been filed with the South Carolina Attorney General's office as of 9 o'clock that morning. Renata's professional composure lasted about 4 minutes into this. Then it cracked, not into tears, into a kind of high, tight silence, the silence of someone whose plan has just collapsed and who doesn't yet know how bad the fall was going to be. Drew said nothing. He was looking at the forged document with the expression of a man mentally calculating how far he was from the nearest exit. The door to the conference room opened. A woman in a dark suit entered, introduced herself as an investigator with the Attorney General's Consumer Protection and Antitrust Division, and placed her own file on the table. Behind her came a Beaufort County Sheriff's deputy who stood near the door with the low-energy patience of someone who has done this many times. Drew stood up. "I'd like to call a lawyer," he said. "That's your right," Ray said. "You're not under arrest. Yet. You're not under arrest. Yet." But I'd sit back down for the moment, because there's one more thing. The investigator slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a printout of text messages. Renata's number at the top, a number below it that the investigator said belonged to the private lender Drew had been working with, a man named in the file as Leonard Pruitt, who had pending complaints in 3 states related to predatory lending practices. The messages were specific. They mentioned the house. They mentioned the closing date. One of them, from Renata's number, said, "He doesn't know anything. It'll be done before Christmas." Renata stared at her own words on the page. Something in her face broke open then. Not strategy, not performance, just the plain, terrible fact of being fully known. Drew was already on his phone, stepping toward the window. The deputy moved slightly. Drew put the phone away. I had not said a single word since they'd arrived. I'd sat at the head of that table in my old jacket, my hands folded, watching. They had barely looked at me. I was the backdrop, the tired old man. The reason for the meeting. I stood up. It took them both a moment to register it. Renata looked at me. Drew looked at me. I walked slowly around the table. Not because my joints demanded it, but because I wanted them to watch. I stopped across from Renata. She was still sitting. She had to look up at me. "Your mother used to say that the most dangerous thing in the world was a man people had stopped paying attention to." My voice was quiet and even. She said it made him invisible. And invisible men see everything. Renata's eyes filled. "Dad, I know what you were going to do," I said. "I know about the listing. I know about the forged document. I know about Leonard Pruitt. I know about the men who've been sitting outside the house at 2 in the afternoon." I paused. I've known since before I even walked through the door. The investigator was writing something. The deputy had not moved. "You thought I was exhausted," I said. You thought I was grieving and soft and too old to see what was right in front of me. You thought the worst thing I could be was a lonely old man who needed to feel useful. I looked at Drew. You thought I was an asset, a balance sheet with a heartbeat. Drew started to say something. I didn't let him. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Holt Building Systems, which has completed commercial projects in 11 states and currently manages a real estate portfolio valued at $47 million. I kept my voice at the same even level. The beach house you were trying to sell for $680,000 represents less than 2% of what I hold in trust. Your mother and I built that on purpose. We lived simply. We drove used cars. We never wanted Jordan. I stopped. I'd meant to say something else. I collected myself. We never wanted you to know how much we had. We wanted you to build your own life, stand on your own, know what it felt like. Renata put her face in her hands. It was not a performance. I could tell. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I was beyond angry by then. Anger is a fire that needs fuel. What I felt was something older and quieter. It was the end of a hope I'd been carrying for 8 years. I'm done. The deputy read them their rights in the parking lot 20 minutes later. Fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse. The charges were thorough. Ray stood next to me on the sidewalk while it happened, and neither of us said anything until the cars pulled away. You okay? He asked. I said I didn't know yet. I drove back to the beach house alone. I had the spare key, the one Carolyn and I had hidden under the loose brick beside the back step. It was still there. Of course it was. They'd never thought to look. I walked through every room. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I found Carolyn's cast iron skillet in the back of a cabinet, behind a bread maker still in the box. I took it out, set it on the counter, and wiped it down with a cloth. It was perfectly seasoned. Carolyn had kept it for 30 years. It would outlast all of us. The proceedings took several months. I did not attend most of them. Ray kept me informed. Drew ultimately pled guilty to fraud and forgery in exchange for a reduced sentence. Renata took the case to trial and lost. The evidence was thorough. Her attorney tried to argue I'd been manipulative, that I had entrapped them, that my concealment of my wealth had created the conditions for their actions. The judge, a methodical man with the patience of someone who had seen everything, dismissed the argument in 3 sentences. They both served time. They lost the right to any claim against the trust. The beach house was relisted and sold, not to pay anyone's debts, because I decided I no longer needed a house that held those particular memories. I used the proceeds, along with a significant portion from my own accounts, to establish the Carolyn Holt Foundation. Its purpose is straightforward: to provide free legal counsel to elderly individuals facing financial exploitation by family members. Statham sits on the board. Josephine Marsh, who had the courage to cross the street when she didn't have to, sits on it too. There was a letter, about 4 months after the sentencing. The return address was the women's correctional facility in Columbia. Renata's handwriting, the same careful loop she'd had since elementary school. I sat on the back porch of my house in Charlotte and held it for a while. The river was low. The light was the particular flat gold of late afternoon in November. I thought about a 7-year-old girl in the back seat of a car trusting completely. I put the letter on the table in front of me. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put it in the fire. Some things cannot be answered. Some doors, once they've been opened, cannot hold anything you'd want to walk back through. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it with a particular clarity that comes to a man who has learned, too late and at considerable cost, the difference between the child he raised and the person they chose to become. Carolyn knew. She always knew. Her foundation is doing good work now. 3 families protected this quarter alone. That is what she would have wanted. Not a house, not money, not even justice, really. Just for someone to pay attention. Just for the quiet ones to win, for once, before it's too late. I am still here. I still run. Though maybe not 6 miles anymore. I still design things, mostly for myself, mostly on paper. I sit on the porch most evenings and watch the river and think about what it means to build something that lasts. The wisest investment I ever made was in a woman who saw the world clearly and loved me anyway. Everything else is just compound interest on that. I used to think that the hardest part of getting older was the body. The back that complains on long drives. The knees that take a moment longer in the morning. But sitting on my porch in Charlotte now, watching the river go by, I understand that none of that is the hard part. The hard part is learning to see people clearly, especially the ones you helped bring into the world. What happened with Renata didn't come from nowhere. Looking back with honest eyes, I can trace every step. I gave her the house without conditions. I kept my wealth hidden out of what I told myself was humility, but what was really, I think, a kind of avoidance. I didn't want her to feel pressure. I didn't want her to feel the weight of expectation. So I removed all weight entirely, and what grew in that weightlessness wasn't freedom. It was a different kind of gravity, one that pulled toward taking rather than building. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody warns you about. It isn't always fast. Sometimes it takes a decade to arrive. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you love. I think about the version of myself that drove down to Hilton Head that November morning. I was a man who knew how to run a company, negotiate a contract, read a room full of people trying to mislead him, and I had been completely blind to my own family for years, not because I lacked the capacity to see, because I chose not to. I chose the comfortable story over the true one. That's not wisdom. That's the thing that gets in wisdom's way. Carolyn never made that choice. She looked at Drew the first night she met him, and she saw exactly what he was. She saw Renata's pattern, the pull toward people who projected strength rather than possessing it. She didn't make a scene. She didn't demand I listen. She just quietly, methodically, built a wall that would hold even after she was gone, because she understood that real intelligence isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about doing the right work before the crisis arrives. That's what I try to carry with me now, not the anger which faded faster than I expected, not even the grief which didn't. What I carry is the lesson Carolyn lived every day, that character is the thing you build when no one is requiring it of you. Drew and Renata made their choices when they thought no one was watching. Josephine Marsh made hers for the same reason, and they were entirely different choices. Same quiet street, same empty driveway. One person crossed the road. The other two stayed inside their house and waited for a payout. The Carolyn Holt Foundation exists because of all of it, because of Carolyn's foresight and Josephine's courage, and even, in a painful way, because of what Renata and Drew did. Every family we've protected since then is a direct consequence of that chain. That's the part I hold on to. Not what was taken, but what got built from the wreckage. I'm 63 years old. I still run. I still design things. I still sit by the river in the evenings and think about what lasts. What lasts is not the house, not the portfolio, not even the name on the door of a building somewhere. What lasts is whether you had the steadiness to do the right thing when it was costly and the clarity to see the truth, even when the truth was about someone you loved. That's the work. That's always been the work.